What more can Shafali Verma do to get back into the Indian white ball setup?
Shafali Verma, who was a constant in the Indian team and in the Indian top order batting lineup, was dropped in November of 2024 and hasn't played for India ever since. For what seemed like a comeback for the Tri-Series at the end of this month, she continues to not find a place in the squad. Before we talk about Shafali Verma's performances, if she's made any changes, and her domestic comeback, hit the subscribe button.
The Women's Premier League just ended, and yet again from the Delhi Capitals' side, Shafali Verma was the top scorer not only for her side but also the top scorer for an Indian batter in the WPL. She scored 304 runs in 9 innings with an impressive strike rate of 152, and a lot of us would have thought that this would have been enough for her to make it back into the Indian white ball setup, but that has not been the case. And before we even get into understanding why she was not picked yet again for the Tri-Series, it's important to understand the lead up to that, why she was dropped in the first place and what she has done since then. Now, this 21-year-old has been around the Indian setup for a decent amount of time. She made her T20I debut way back in 2019 and she made her ODI debut in 2021. Ever since then, despite all of the talent, explosiveness and potential that Shafali Verma has showed, this has not necessarily translated in the kind of runs she's been scoring. In the 29 ODIs that she has played thus far, her average is only 23 with a strike rate of 83. And in T20I, she's played 85 T20Is and her average there is higher than her ODI average of 23. Here she averages 25, but still it is not something that's been impressive for her. Now, it was no surprise that Shafali Verma was dropped because of the lack of consistent scores that she was scoring in ODI cricket. In her last 12 innings especially, she got no score of 50 plus and her average was just 14.25. Not only that, we also compared Shafali Verma to a lot of the current Indian cricketers as well as women cricketers who are opening the innings internationally. And her record there too is dismal. In ODI, she has the worst average for an Indian cricketer who's played at least 20 or more innings since her debut. Even among 17 openers across the world, she has the third worst average for someone who's played a minimum of 20 innings. Not only that, even her T20I record is extremely similar, where she has the second worst average amongst the current Indian batters for minimum 20 innings. And in a list of 39 openers from across the world who have played a minimum of 30 innings, here too she has the 24th worst average.
Now, these are overall numbers of Shafali Verma, but leading up to her being dropped, the multiple series that she was part of still wasn't all that great. In the Women's T20 World Cup of 2024, the Indian team had a terrible outing at the World Cup, but Shafali Verma was the second highest scorer with an average of just 24 and a strike rate of 105. These are bad numbers, but it also shows of how India's performance was at the World Cup. And then we come to the last series she was part of for the Indian team. She played 3 matches against the New Zealanders, scoring just 56 runs with an average of 18. As an opener, you'd rather get dropped than continue playing. For someone who hasn't scored an ODI 50 since July of 2022, on November 24, 2024, she was finally dropped from the Indian team. One of the key problems with Shafali Verma and her batting is the fact that she isn't able to bat long. She's of course explosive and her strike rate does say so. It's the inability to bat long, especially in an ODI format where you get to play 50 overs. As an opener, you have to be able to at least bat 20 overs. And she's been struggling to do that since 2022. And she is well aware of this, right? In a recent interview, she did talk about how she is looking to bat long. For someone with so much talent and potential, it's hardly the good balls that are getting her out. It's mostly her throwing her wickets away. For her to come back to the Indian team, the only thing that she has to do is perform in the domestic circuit.
Ever since she was dropped from the Indian setup, she obviously has got the time to go back and play domestic cricket. One of the first few tournaments she played was the Senior Women's One Day Trophy way back in December 2024, and here she performed extremely well. What stood out in this tournament was obviously the fact that she was the highest run scorer, but the manner in which she got those runs and how much better the quality of her scores were as compared to anyone else on this list. In the 7 innings that she did play, she scored 527 runs at an average of over 75. Not only that, the impressive part was her strike rate, where she was striking at 150 plus. She was also the only player in this tournament to hit 20 plus sixes. She got 200s and 250s, and even in that, the one century that she got that unfortunately ended up in her team being in a losing cause was a mammoth 197. And in another domestic tournament that she played, she scored 414 runs in just 5 matches, where she got 1 century and 350s, again at a very impressive strike rate of 145.
And then we come to the Senior Women's Multi-Day Tournament that just got over, wherein she continued to be impressive. She played 3 matches with an average of 52. She had a strike rate of 90 plus in this multi-day tournament. She scored 150 and 100. But if we were continue to be critical for someone like a Shafali Verma who has been in good form, she would have felt that she missed out on scoring a lot more runs in this multi-day tournament for someone who's looking to bat long and got ample number of opportunities in these 3 matches. And then finally, when we come to the WPL, she has been impressive in all the 3 seasons. Every season of the WPL so far, she's averaged 30 plus with a strike rate of more than 150. If anything, it just goes to show that when she is in form and when she's in good nick, she will score a lot of runs at a high pace. The problem only begins when the format is much longer.
Whatever we'd spoken up until now was, of course, what had to do with Shafali Verma's stats and how she's been doing in the domestic circuit. But what she's also changed is how she's been playing her cricket, how she's been batting, how she's been setting up to play deliveries. It was no secret that in the WPLs of 2023 and 2024, a great scoring area for Shafali Verma was the long on region. In fact, this area was so productive for her that she scored 27% of all of her runs in this region. And in general, she was a more leg side dominant player, and this meant that a lot of teams were working the strategies in a way such that they would be able to block out her leg side play. This is where Shafali Verma showed her new capabilities and adaptability when it comes to batting, because in the WPL of 2025, she was able to open up her offside and play through the cover region. And even in that, the cover region was extremely productive for her as she scored 28% of all of her offside runs through that region.
This change didn't magically happen, right? She did make a couple of changes in her stance and the way she sets up to face a delivery. For starters, she stopped her initial movement. If you look at how she batted around the 23-24 season, a lot of how she sets up is by the initial trigger movement that she has. She would go back and across and hope to be ready to face the delivery. It's funny because a lot of international batters go from going still to then having a trigger movement, whereas Shafali Verma has gone from having a trigger movement to staying very still in the crease. Now when you look at her bat, especially in the WPL of 2025, not only is she more still, but she's side down, which means that a front shoulder, that is a left shoulder, is facing the bowler. Now what this does is with the trigger movement, there are chances of your head falling across, whereas in fact if you're standing very still in the crease, that is eliminated. And because it's a batter like Shafali Verma who's so dependent on a hand-eye coordination and the aggressive play that she has, the possibility of standing still might not only help a shot selection, but might ensure she is able to reach the pitch of the ball by using her feet and play the ball along the ground. Whereas when she was having a trigger movement, it might force her to commit to a shot because she'll be too late by the time she does a trigger movement, which means the chances of her just throwing her hands at the ball without moving her feet is very likely.
This of course has been the series of events leading up to the selection for the tri-series and the squad that India is going to be taking for that tri-series. The important question now is that despite all of this, despite the technical changes, despite Shafali Verma getting all of those runs in the domestic circuit, why is she still not back in the squad? And the first point may not be that obvious, but the simple fact is that Shafali Verma is someone who's been in the international circuit playing for the Indian team for the last 3 to 4 years. Despite her having gotten such a long rope and her not performing, the fact that she went back to the domestic circuit and got runs does not mean that she can immediately make it back into the squad. Because of the fact that she made her India debut so early, you always knew that she had something special about her, and so for her to dominate in one season of domestic cricket is not a big deal. And the second and probably the more important point, and something that you people might also know, is Pratika Rawal. Pratika Rawal came in as the replacement opener for the Indian team after Shafali Verma was dropped. And since then, Pratika Rawal has not set a single foot wrong. He is a player who's played 6 innings, and out of those 6 innings, she's got 350s and 1 century to go with it already. Not only has she scored 444 runs at an impressive average of 74, but even her strike rate is on par with someone like a Shafali Verma, striking at a 95. But even beyond just the number of runs that she's been able to score and the kind of start she's gotten to her international career, one thing that is already standing out in Pratika Rawal that was missing in Shafali Verma is her ability to bat long innings and her ability to be able to forge partnerships with all of her players.
With Pratika Rawal in the squad and the fact that Shafali Verma gets criticized for her fitness and the fielding standards not being at the international level, she will not only have to improve on that aspect of the game because it is very important, but continue scoring runs in the domestic circuit the way she is doing right now. But more than anything else, the two important things that is going Shafali Verma's way is, one is her age. She's just a 20-year-old with so much experience already in the international circuit. So if anything, it will be easier for her in the coming years to not only perform in the domestic circuit, but hopefully when she comes back to the Indian team, continue scoring runs there. And the most valuable point of this all, and a safe space even for her, is that she still has a grade B contract under the BCCI in the Indian team. For someone who was dropped in November of 2024 and hasn't played for India ever since, this should be a boost for her morale and know that she's still not out of the scheme of things. This has been our video on Shafali Verma and if and when she will be back to the Indian squad. If you have enjoyed this video, like, share and subscribe, all that good stuff. We put out videos 3 times a week, that's Mondays, Tuesdays and Fridays. If you haven't followed us on Instagram and Twitter, do that too. The links are in the description below. If you haven't followed us on our WhatsApp channel where we communicate about a lot of different things, do that too. Thank you so much for watching. Peace.